So the last presentation of this session is Ciphertext-Simulatable HE from not yet? Not yet. From BFV with Randomized Evaluation. We have three authors, In-Tak Hwang, Seong-Hong Min, and Yongsoo Song. And Yongsoo will give the presentation.
Thank you for introduction. I'm very happy to present my recent study at my favorite workshop. And this is joint work with my two PhD students sitting over there. And let's get started. So in this community, we have made a lot of effort on improving the performance, functionality, or usability of homomorphic encryption schemes, which is great. But actually, our ultimate goal is not just to develop HE crypto systems itself, but really use them to build the secure protocols. But in this context, there's one important research topic whose importance is kind of underestimated in the academia. So let's consider this primary application of homomorphic encryption of reading two-party computation between a client and the server. So where the client behaves as a key owner and the server behaves as an evaluator. So the Alice generates a key pair, send the encryption to the server, and the server computes some function f over encrypted data and send back the result. And finally, Alice decrypts the ciphertext and get the result. So here, a natural question is, does the security of in-the-space security of HE necessarily imply the security of this two-PC protocol? So maybe many audience may already know the answer, that unfortunately the answer is no. The in-the-space security only guarantees the privacy of data, but it doesn't really protect the privacy of the server. So to be precise, if the function f involves some confidential data of the server, then the security of HE is not naturally extended to the security of this protocol. So to be precise, in the semi-honest model, the client is happy with this protocol because in-the-space security guarantees the privacy. But on the other hand, to protect the server's privacy, we need the notion of circuit privacy, which I will introduce very soon. And just for your information, if you want to achieve more stronger security notions like malicious security, we need a proof of plaintext knowledge for clients' public key and ciphertext. And actually, this can be done very efficiently. And you can check one of our posters about this proof of plaintext knowledge. And on the other hand, to ensure the malicious security against adversarial server, we need a verifiable computation. But still, verifiable computation is much far from being practiced. So we need much more study here. Okay, so let's come back to the original topic about circuit privacy. So, like roughly speaking, we say that homomorphic encryption is circuit private if the client learns nothing from the output ciphertext beyond the computed result. So more formally, there should be a simulator such that it is infeasible to distinguish these two experiments. In the first experiment, this is the usual protocol, like encrypt and evaluate. In the second experiment, the simulator takes evaluation key and ciphertext and the computed result as input and needs to generate some ciphertext which is indistinguishable from the real output from the homomorphic evaluation. So there's some related notion called the sanitization. We say that some algorithm is sanitizing if this algorithm can wash out all information of the ciphertext except the underlying message. So the sanitization is in some sense stronger than circuit privacy because you can just run this sanitization algorithm at the end of the computation to achieve the circuit privacy. So these two notions are like the well-known notions in this line of work. So to achieve this circuit privacy, there has been proposed a few solutions. Like some of them are generic. Generic means these methods can be generally applicable to any lattice-based homomorphic schemes. On the other hand, these specific solutions can be only applied to very specific schemes. So, for example, in this in our Bible, the notion of noise flooding was introduced, and the notion of circuit privacy was introduced. It basically adds an encryption of 0 with a very large size of noise to randomize every information in the ciphertext. And in 2016, Liu Duca and Damien Stelle proposed what's called a washing machine. It basically runs many iterative bootstrappings followed by some small noise smoothing to iteratively reduce the amount of information in the ciphertext. So this one is very simple but requires a huge parameter, and this one is asymptotically better but practically very expensive due to many bootstrappings. And in this line of work, we have a very nice idea proposed in 2016. They proposed a circuit private variant of the GSW based on what's called the Gaussian gadget decomposition. So when they operate some GSW operations, instead of doing deterministic gadget decomposition, they sample this decomposition from some Gaussian distribution defined over a coset to randomize the error in the ciphertext. And this idea was adapted in these two concurrent studies. They proposed almost the identical solution for sanitization of TFHE by randomizing the gadget decomposition in the external product. And last year, we also proposed more practical sanitization for TFHE, which is now free from this expensive Gaussian gadget decomposition. And you can take a look at our poster over there. And as you can see here, there are some specific solutions for GSW or TFHE, but there's no solution for BFV. And that's basically our goal in this work. Oh, so by the way, in this talk, let's forget about the weird CKK scheme with the approximate functionality, because it's not even easy to define the notion of circuit privacy or like a sanitization. So we'll just focus on nice and like exact schemes with a perfect functionality. Okay, so in this work, we first ask a question: can we achieve circuit privacy for BFV? Of course, we can use generic solutions, but they are very expensive. So, but we realized that achieving circuit privacy or sanitization is very challenging in BFV for some reasons. So instead, we propose some alternative security notions, which are weaker than circuit privacy, but still general enough to replace these notions in most homomorphic encryption applications. And we also provide a concrete construction to achieve this security notion. Okay, so in this two-party computation setup, we now consider the MPC setting, which where these two parties compute some public circuit C on their private inputs X and Y. So we are not computing any function, but now we have a fixed circuit C and over some private inputs X and Y. So the protocol description has been slightly modified here. And this is the definition of a ciphertext simulatability. This is quite similar to circuit privacy. So informally speaking, the output ciphertext from this protocol shouldn't leak more information about Y beyond the desired computational result. That's the idea. So in this definition, we need a simulator, which is denoted as a SimCT, that takes these key pairs and input ciphertext and the final result as an input, and simulate some ciphertext which is indistinguishable from the output of a real evaluation in the real protocol. And compared to the notion of circuit privacy, now we fixed the circuit C, and also simulator is given access to the secret key. And this is not a problem in the context of 2PC because we introduced this notion to protect the server's privacy. But in this protocol, the user, the client, anyway has access to the secret key. So it doesn't really reduce the usability of this definition. And it is, you can prove it very easily that if an HE scheme is a ciphertext simulatable for a circuit C, then the 2PC protocol that I described in the previous slide is secure in the semi-honest model. So it can really replace the notion of circuit privacy. Okay, so how to achieve circuit simulatability for BFV? It's very obvious that the original BFV scheme doesn't satisfy these properties. So we first introduce one more security notion called the error simulatability for BFV. This is somewhat weaker than ciphertext simulatability, but we can achieve this property by randomizing some operations of BFV. And then we can compile this error simulatable variant of BFV into ciphertext simulatable variant of BFV by simply adding some encryption of 0. Okay, so let me quickly recall the BFV scheme. So just one thing, I just want to point out that I assume that this plaintext modulus T divides the ciphertext modulus so that we can define the error of a ciphertext explicitly. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult to distinguish the message and the error of a ciphertext in this value. So we have this very simple formula without any rounding. And this ciphertext can be fully identified by this masking A and message M and the error term E. So we will denote this error term as this function. And in our solution, the public key consists of this public key for encryption and also some other evaluation keys, such as a linearization key and automorphism keys. Actually, in the previous protocol, we don't really need public key for encryption because the client can simply use a private key encryption algorithm, but this public key will be used as a randomization tool in our solution. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this notion of error simulatability is somewhat weaker than ciphertext simulatability, but can be defined for BFV. So we say that a BFV scheme is error simulatable for a circuit C if there exists a simulator that takes the same inputs as before and outputs some error. And in the first experiment, we run the protocol as usual and compute the ciphertext and extract its error term. So that's the difference between ciphertext and error simulatability. And it's very obvious that the error simulatability is easier to achieve because the error is just one component of ciphertext. So to simulate the full ciphertext, you need to simulate not only error, but also other components like masking and the message. But it is possible to reduce the error simulatability to ciphertext simulatability by simply adding a random encryption of 0. So this is a necessary lemma to prove our reduction. So you don't really need to read all the details of this lemma, but in this lemma, you can show that the encryption of 0 is simply indistinguishable from just a random ring LW instance where A is a uniform, but E, now this error E, is sampled from some weird distribution with this covariance matrix, depending on the secret key and the error term of public key. So you don't need to understand this term, but the lesson here is that the encryption of 0 can just randomize the masking, because in this distribution, masking A and the error E are independently sampled. And the proof of this lemma is based on what's called the hinted ring LW assumption proposed in this paper. Okay, so now we are ready to build a reduction from error to ciphertext simulatability. So suppose that you have a BFV scheme. So they share the same key generation, encryption, decryption algorithms as usual, but we are just modifying evaluation algorithms here. So suppose that you have an error simulatable version of BFV scheme for some circuit C, then you can actually build a ciphertext simulatable variant of BFV for the same circuit, but with a very small error overhead. So the proof sketch is that you can, in this new scheme, you can just use the same evaluation algorithm, and at the end of the computation, you just need to add an encryption of 0. Then now this ciphertext is simulatable, because in this error simulatable version, you can simulate the output error of this output ciphertext, but this new encryption of 0 just fully randomized the masking part. So masking part is now uniformly random, and you have a small extra error, which is independent from everything else. So you can build a ciphertext simulator on the top of this error simulator. So this reduction is very cheap and efficient. So now our final question is how to really construct an error simulatable BFV scheme for arbitrary circuits. And our solution is basically to redesign basic operations like addition, multiplication, and others, so that the error distribution of an output ciphertext depends only on the errors of input ciphertext and some key pairs generated by the client. And it is no longer depend on any other ciphertext components like a masking or the underlying plain text. So if we somehow achieve this property, then we can build an error simulatable BFV for arbitrary circuits, because basically you can replace every gate by these randomized variants. So the client knows the errors of input wire because the client encrypted fresh encryptions, and she also knows all secret and evaluation keys. And for each gate, the errors of input wires determines the distribution of output error, so that you can simulate all errors in the entire circuit by just repeating this conditional distribution analysis, so that including the output wire, so that you can finally simulate the error in this output ciphertext. So that's the idea. So the only remaining question is how to randomize these individual unit operations of VGB to achieve this property. And for addition, no modification is necessary. The basic operations already provide this property, because for plain cipher addition, the output ciphertext has exactly the same error as this input ciphertext. And for cipher addition, the output ciphertext error is simply the sum of two errors in input ciphertext, so you can simulate the output error using input errors by computing their summation. Plain cipher multiplication is more interesting because suppose that we are given a plain text Y and a ciphertext C, which is an encryption of 0. The usual algorithm multiplies just Y modulo T to this ciphertext to compute this plain cipher multiplication, where this Y bracket T, Y mod T is the integer representation of Y. Then this output error is obtained as this original error multiplied by y mod t, which obviously depends on this private input y. So we need some randomization here. So we introduced some similar idea as in this paper, so that instead of just multiplying this vector, we sample y prime from some Gaussian distribution defined over this coset y plus tr. So y plus tr is just a set of all elements which is congruent to y modulo t. So we multiply y prime to this ciphertext and add a small smoothing error. It's easy to check that the correctness is still guaranteed because y prime is congruent to y modulo t, so the plain text part is fine. And regarding the error, now the output error formula is given as a y prime times e plus e prime, where here this e is considered as a constant, and y prime and e prime, they are sampled from some different Gaussian over coset or this full lattice. And you can show that if these parameters sigma and tau satisfy some conditions about smoothing parameter or whatever, then this output error follows the Gaussian distribution of this covariance matrix, where this matrix E is an anticircular matrix corresponding to this error term E. So the output error is still simulatable as this discrete Gaussian distribution. Finally, we need a Cipher-Cipher multiplication, and it was actually the most difficult operation when we studied this topic, because the usual algorithm involves 3 procedures called the simple product linearization and modular switching. And all these 3 procedures do not ensure the error simulatability property. So, but actually in the old version, which is now available on ePrint, we carefully randomized each of these 3 procedures using some Gaussian randomization so that the output distribution can be simulated. But it turns out that actually there's much more simpler and even faster method. So we just deleted the previous method, and we are going to update our paper very soon. But still, this previous method might be interesting to those who are working on some lattice theory. Okay, so in this Cipher-Cipher multiplication, basically we use this formula, which might be familiar for MPC researchers. Like x1 times x2 can be represented by the product of r1 plus x1, r2 plus x2, and minus 3 terms. We are going to use this formula to randomize the multiplication operation. So basically for given two ciphertext C1 and C2, which are encryptions of x1 and x2 with errors E1 and E2, we sample just 2 random messages and add random encryptions of R1 and R2 to C1 and C2. So now C1 prime and C2 prime, they are encryptions of R1 plus X1 and R2 plus X2. And now our randomized Cipher-Cipher multiplication is as follows. Like we multiply C1 prime and C2 prime minus R2 times C1 minus R1 times C2 minus delta times R1 times R2 modulo Q. So here, this multiplication is the usual deterministic Cipher-Cipher multiplication, the well-known multiplication algorithm of BFV, while this PMULT is a plain text ciphertext multiplication, but the randomized variant that I introduced in the previous slide. So if we define this new randomized Cipher-Cipher multiplication, now this new algorithm satisfies the desired property because this first term, multiplication of C1 prime, C2 prime, its error depends only on input errors E1, E2, and evaluation keys. So you can simulate the error term of this ciphertext using these inputs of the simulator. The reason is that by adding these encryptions of R1, you fully randomized the masking of this ciphertext as well as the encrypted plain text, so that the only remaining information in this ciphertext is just the error EI. So this distribution just is fully determined by this E1, E2, and these key materials. And on the other hand, we already have shown that this error of a randomized plain text ciphertext multiplication depends only on this input ciphertext error. So it's okay. So, and finally, this constant addition has no extra error. So finally, the entire error distribution, which is the sum of these three terms, depends on E1, E2, and secret key and public keys as desired. So we modified every single operation of BFV to satisfy our desired property. So to sum up, we basically randomized the BFV operations so that it allows the client to analyze the distribution of the error of an output ciphertext of each gate using the errors of input ciphertext and secret and public keys. And our algorithms are free from expensive Gaussian gadget decomposition. Actually, our first solution was relying on this technique, but now it's very cheap. So to be precise, the randomized plain cipher multiplication has a small overhead in terms of complexity and parameter or noise growth, because now it requires 2 Gaussian samplings, and these parameters is slightly larger than the deterministic operation to satisfy some conditions for Gaussian convolution lemma. But in the case of a randomized cipher-cipher multiplication, it presents almost comparable performance to the usual cipher-cipher multiplication, because it simply consists of a deterministic cipher-cipher multiplication and 2 randomized plain cipher multiplications. But plain cipher multiplications are way more cheaper than cipher-cipher multiplications in terms of both noise growth and the complexity. So cipher-cipher is almost optimal in this manner. And based on these building blocks, we are able to design error simulatable BFV scheme for arbitrary circuits by composing these randomized gates to represent arbitrary gates. And finally, we compiled into ciphertext simulatable variants of BFV by adding an encryption of 0 at the end of the computation. So using these variants, you can now build a secure BFV-based two-party computation protocols. So there's a couple of extra contributions not covered in this talk. So first of all, we also proposed the strong ciphertext simulatability notion, which is similar to ciphertext simulatability, but now the simulator has no access to the secret key. So it's more difficult to achieve. And this notion is in some sense equivalent to circuit privacy for some certain class of circuits. But we also showed that it is possible to reduce the error simulatable BFV into strong ciphertext simulatable BFV scheme by consuming 1 more depth from plain cipher multiplication. And finally, we could also present sanitization algorithm for BFV without these multiple successive iterations in washing machine technique by randomizing individual operation in this bootstrapping procedure. So just a single iteration of a randomized bootstrapping provides the sanitization of BFV, but it's still not yet practical in terms of concrete complexity compared to the state-of-the-art BFV bootstrapping. So actually, our construction can be more practical when the circuit is small, meaning that the degree of your function is low. In this case, we can avoid expensive parameter overhead from noise flooding or bootstrapping so that you can efficiently build a 2PC without much parameter overhead. And this completes my presentation, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Any quick questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, so we are talking about BFV. Is there anything specific about BFV, or can it also be BGV?
So that's a good question. So remember that I just focused on BFV with a specific parameter where the modulus T divides the Ciphertext modulus Q. The reason is that the error can be defined, well defined. But in the case of BGV, it is hard to define the error over ciphertext formally. And even if you define the error somehow, even addition requires modification. Because if you add M1 plus T E1 and T2 plus T E2, then you have a M1 plus M2 plus T times E1 plus E2. But you may have a carry from the message so that output error can be E1 plus E2 or plus minus 1. So it is hard to apply our approach. So that's why we focus on BFV. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Actually, these people are. Last question. There is also their poster where you can ask even more questions.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Just one simple question. So can you elaborate a little bit on why it is hard to bootstrapping your BFV? Because basically for some constructions you can just evaluate a polynomial and then just it generates the effect of a bootstrapping. And if you can do addition and multiplication, then polynomial should be easy.
So, I mean, I said that you can just apply our technique to bootstrapping. So applying our techniques to bootstrapping is not difficult, but it just requires extra overhead in terms of a parameter. So theoretically, it's still valid because asymptotically you can achieve almost optimal parameter, but from the practical perspective, it can be more expensive than simply noise flooding.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, the speaker again.